everybody. I'm Marley. As Read Across America's ambassador, I hope to help the National Education Association spark a love of reading among readers of all ages and foster community around diverse books. When people talk about books together, their understanding of one another grows so much. That's why I'm excited to make a reading connection today with Supriya Kelkar, author of Strong as Fire, Fierce as Flame, a title featured for NEA's year-round celebration of Read Across America. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so thrilled to be here with you.
It's been really cool to learn about you, and I love hearing historical fiction, which I think is a genre that for middle grade is often not talked about as much, but I love the story and I love watching other kids review it and write about it and talk about it. So Strong as Fire, Fierce as Flame is an empowering and clear title. So when you think about titles, did it come to you before writing, after writing, during the process? How did that help set the tone or affirm the tone that you had already set for your writing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually the title was different when we sold the book, and the publishers had this really great idea to come up with something new that really captured the main character's spirit and what we want readers to feel after they read this book. So once that title came to be, I actually did a revision where I thought I really need to make my main character super empowered and feel that fire within her so she can inspire all of us to have the fire within us, spread and grow. So yeah, it really helped me in my writing.
Oh, that's so nice. I've had, my own experiences with publishers, and I like it when you can get a positive contribution to what the
Yes,
story means and not one that you feel like takes away from it. Uh,
totally.
when I was researching, I also noticed that there's another title called Ahimsa that I had actually originally been preparing for because I thought it was just a translation. So can you talk to us a little bit about that story, which has a fairly similar cover with a noticeable new flag on the Ahimsa cover,
Yes.
and the difference between the two titles?
Yeah, so ahimsa means nonviolence. It can be pronounced as ahimsa or ahimsa. And it's one of the tenets in several religions from South Asia. And it was part of the inspiration behind the nonviolent resistance, which got the British colonizers to finally leave India in the 1940s. So ahimsa takes place in 1942. And it's about a girl who's pretty privileged, and she finds out that one of her parents is joining the nonviolent resistance against the British, and she's worried that her dad is going to get hurt or possibly be killed because a lot of people were losing their lives in this struggle over centuries. And it turns out he's not the one going, her mom is. And so when her mom is arrested for her role in the nonviolent movement, the girl must take over and make sure that their little part gets completed. And it's based on loosely based on my great grandmother, who was a nonviolent freedom fighter against the British and went on to become one of India's first female congresswomen.
I
And
think that's so awesome. I really
thank you.
I love the titles. I think that both of them, they seem similar in the idea that it's both about young women leadership, which is a really cool thing that I think is strung together in all your books. But of course, we're going to be talking about Strong as Fire today. So I also wanted to kind of touch on the choice to talk about historical fiction. I think, especially in an American world, or in what feels like an American world, I think in many of the eyes of American children like me, we often only hear about World War II or enslavement periods when it comes to the experiences of the world at large, which I think can be a misjudgment by many educators to only talk about those moments.
Yeah.
So when you choose to talk about something that happens in 1857, that is not a part of colonial, times and powdered wigs, how do you take on that challenge of knowing that there are going to be a lot of young readers that have never heard of this before, that don't even know about this whole other hemisphere and environment that's really critical to today's life?
Yeah, what an incredible question. So that was the inspiration behind the book in parts because when I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and there were no South Asians in books. We didn't exist in books. We didn't exist in commercials. We didn't exist in junk mail, like the people posing there. We weren't in TV shows or movies. There's just a complete erasure. And so when I was growing up, I wrote stories. Almost all of my characters were white with yellow Crayola hair. The brown crayon was for, drawing tree trunks and dogs. I never used it, because I never saw that, and I never thought my story was important. And there was only one South Asian representation in all of media, and it was on this really, it was a really racist portrayal played by someone who wasn't South Asian on a primetime cartoon that's still on today. And anyone who's around my age, we were bullied pretty mercilessly about that growing up. So, but there was one time in third or fourth grade when our teacher read us The Secret Garden. And I remember sitting up a little taller because there were Indian characters in it, and I recognized Indian languages. And it was the first time I ever felt seen in anything in school. And then I quickly realized that those characters weren't even thought of as human by the protagonist in that book. They were just sort of there to serve her. They were subhuman, and they were in the backdrop even when the story took place in India, in their own land. So looking back on that memory, I thought about, who we center in these stories that are classics. And a lot of classics take place in times of just awful colonization and brutality around the world. And we're only seeing one person's point of view and completely erasing the story of the indigenous people of the lands that were colonized. So that's really what inspired me to make Strongest Fire, Fiercest Flame. And even though it takes place in India, and it's not, a history that's covered in our school system in, K through 12, we don't really learn about the 1800s in India. I wanted to write a story that challenges all readers to think about whose story is being centered and who's being left out, and they can apply it to any classic they read, any picture book they're reading, and to what they learn in history class and in social studies classes, because we're often taught that colonizers were really brave men who explored and found new lands and helped the backwards indigenous people of those lands. And that's really far from the truth. And so I wanted to write a story that would really challenge that notion and make readers think and apply it to the history that we are taught in our schools and to anything that they do read.
I think it's very successful in that effort, and I enjoy it a lot. As someone that, even as a Black girl, I often only see my experiences through enslavement. So it's a very different kind of experience where you're both the positive and uplifting stories of Indian Americans are not shown, and even the most darkest moments and the moments of overcoming things are not shown.
Right.
So when you think about and the way that teachers might be able to put this into their classroom, what advice do you give for young teachers, or any type of teachers that are interested in making sure that history shows all these kinds of experiences? How do you make these stories, which I think is not necessarily a positive story but is a beautiful one, make it approachable to young kids that, hey, the United States, this is not the only way we can look at our history. This is not the only way. So how do you think teachers can kind of navigate this new and important desire to show all kinds of experiences?
Yeah, I think it's so important that they, this is a great step towards sort of decolonizing our education. And they can use this book and other books like this to really make their students think about, maybe you can apply this to the stories we're taught about American history and what happened here and whose story is not told the right way, and what's the true story of Thanksgiving, and what's the true story of pilgrims and colonists. I talk about the Industrial Revolution in the back of this book, which is a topic that we're taught about in school here. So I think teachers can sort of relate the lessons from my book into things that they're taught in the curriculum. So, a lot of money was stolen from South Asia during colonization. So trillions and trillions of dollars were taken through this really devious scheme of, forcing farmers to only sell their grains to the British, which led to the deaths of millions and millions of South Asians in starvation, and through having artisans create things and taxing them for creating it. And then they would use that same tax money to buy the products from them. So they were basically getting the products for free and then selling them back in Europe. And so all this money that was looted contributed to things like the Industrial Revolution and to several advancements in the West. So I think it's a great opportunity for teachers to help students dive deeper into history and think more about the stuff that's presented in textbooks.
I completely agree. I'm just a high school student as well. And I get really frustrated with some of my teachers that I think they don't always close the loop. And I think this book helps close the loop, that we learn about things from such an American point of view. And we don't always understand, well, how do we get there? Who are the
Yeah.
people that made these decisions? Where did they go to school? What did they like to do? And actually, what your story is able to do is make sure that we understand that every experience exists in a larger and more global context. And in
Yeah.
order to execute that, I think you have to do a lot of research and a lot of learning yourself. So, how did that process go for you of actually saying, hey, I know these things from my great grandmother or from my family or from my own experiences, but how much was there to learn as you began to talk about an older and less documented period of time?
Yeah, there was so much that I learned that I just didn't know before. I guess with Ahimsa, it was a little easier because it took place in the 1940s. So I have family members who lived, through that era, and I could just ask them questions and make sure that things were historically accurate. For the 1800s, it was a lot harder because obviously there's no one around that I can ask about what life in the 1850s was like. But also, there's not much written. So we have a family friend who's a professor of Indian history. So I bugged him a lot and he gave me a lot of books from the 1600s and 1700s and 1800s. And those were really tough reads. It was nothing I had ever been exposed to in school, in the history classes I took in college. I had never seen stuff like this. So a lot of them were journals written by Memsabs, who were the wives of the officers of the British East Company, where they, talked about Indians as animals and compared them to certain animals, and where they talk about, buying a baby for a couple rupees off the street because it was kind of a fun thing to do. It was a tough read. It was very hurtful at times, but it was also something that inspired me because I thought this is something that I, as a South Asian person, never knew about. And so I really wanted to bring light to it because I'm sure people of all backgrounds did not know the depths of colonization. And even in India, I know there's a lot of, sort of, oh, the British did good things, sort of this revisionist history. And I really wanted to challenge all of that. So the research really propelled that in me.
I think it's very impressive to be able to do those kinds of things. I know that, my family, just based off our own ethnicity, we aren't descendants of enslavement. So I could only imagine how difficult it is to understand those kinds of things. My mom's an immigrant from Jamaica, and my dad's family is from Cabo Verde, which is a country that was colonized by the Portuguese, but there's no trace of the 1865 horrific nature of chattel slavery and any of those kinds of really graphic events. So how did you kind of approach mentally knowing that, hey, I'm about to get into child marriage, famine, colonization, things that I don't always know I actually want to hear about or think about, but people I love and care about have experienced. So what was the kind of mental preparation of saying, this is a dark time and I'm going to have to invest a lot of my energy into recording, understanding, and remembering this dark time?
Yeah, I think I wasn't prepared because I didn't really know what I was going to be reading about. There are some graphic depictions of sati, which is that, very rare ritual that is depicted in the book, where a widow immolates herself on her husband's pyre. Those were all really tough things to read about, but I sort of took it on as a responsibility. And so even though I wasn't really prepared, I wanted to make sure my readers were prepared. So I had to think about how to, be true to the history, but also present it in a way that is acceptable to elementary school and middle school and high school audiences. So I think maybe more of the preparation went into that than my research. I didn't go about it right.
So what would you go back and change if you could? What do you think you could tell yourself before embarking on this project?
Oh, I just wish I knew sort of the horrors of everything before I read it, just so I would have been a little more prepared. Because it's upsetting when you're reading those words, and And when you're thinking about just how much injustice there was, how many millions, I think the number estimated is 15 million people starved due to British colonization. And that's not even counting the, hundreds of thousands and possibly millions of people who died because their livelihoods were taken away. So it was tough. I guess I just wish I probably knew a little bit more before I embarked on the research part.
I think the research, especially for historical fiction, is super valuable. And I think that it's integrated in such a beautiful way that it doesn't feel like a textbook, but it feels like you could teach it to other people, where it has no elements or like boring
Yeah.
bulleted lists or anything, but it's rather a story that feels like it can be told and passed down. So even within your own family, what kind of stories were you hearing about colonization? Maybe not even from such an older period of time that made you even more interested in pursuing this project. What were your parents talking to you about when it came to growing up as a South Asian woman in an American world?
Yeah. So my dad was like a newborn when during the last few months that India was under colonial rule. So he doesn't have any of those memories, but I was able to speak to my great aunt who lived through it, and she would just tell me. I was just really impressed with how many females were changing the world, their world in South Asia, and that we rarely hear about them. So that really made me interested, and that made me want to think about, well, what about females from the 1800s? And in Indian history, we really just hear about the queen who's mentioned in this book, who was a widowed queen who actually fought the British on the battlefield. And she had to dress like a man and fight them on the field and on the battlefield. And then she escaped and she eventually lost her life. And so I just thought about, what about the regular girls who we don't hear about? And even in like all the old paintings that I would find from that era, I very rarely saw sort of your everyday person. It was really paintings of royalty or soldiers, and they weren't there. They had also been erased the same way I felt that like there was no representation for me. So I kind of wanted to really tell their story and talk about, there were native issues to their specific families or cultures that oppressed them, and there was also oppression from outsiders. And I really wanted to talk about how they would deal with all of that and empower kids today of all backgrounds.
I think kids can be really empowered by it. I always encourage when people ask me, because I'm an activist and I've done so things that have helped shape communities. A lot of it comes from an understanding of the past. A lot of it, where it's really me seeing that, hey, this moment that I'm experiencing has happened since the 1940s, since the beginning of this, and looking back at the people that were making those differences. So, what authors inspired you when you were younger that you saw, hey, they've done something that's really cool? They've told a story that matters to me, that made you feel more inclined to become an author and to tell stories?
I didn't really have one particular author, but what I did have was book access. And I'm so privileged and lucky that I did have that. So this was before, places like Amazon existed. My uncle and aunt, as a gift to me for my entire childhood, gave me a membership to a book of the month club. And so I would get 3 books in the mail every month. And I would just read them over and over and over again. And I think just by reading, I was able to really fall in love with books. Most of those authors, all of those authors did not look like me. They did not look like me. I think every single one of them was white. So I love to read. I never felt seen in any of those books, but I love to read. And maybe because I didn't feel seen, that made me realize, and because I never knew how important my story was as a child. As an adult, when I finally started telling stories of my family and of my culture, I just felt this fire sort of like in the book that this is my story and it deserves to be told. And I really think it wasn't just one book, it was just books in general. And seeing that other people's stories were valued, and I wanted my story to be valued the same way.
I think that experience I've heard from so many authors that are of your generation, where it's less of I've had the ability to notice that pattern because I have so many books where girls like me are the main character and I knew I could. But for you guys, it was just the pure love of reading that made you kind of transition into the pure love of writing. And I
Yes.
found out that you're also a screenwriter, which is so cool. It's like my secret thing I want to do. I don't know if I will ever, I don't know if I know I can, but I don't know if
Yes,
I
we
ever
can.
will. But
Yes.
as a kind of fun and silly question, if you could think about any historical period that you knew would automatically be greenlit for a movie that you could write the script for, would it be Strong as Fire, Fierce as Flame? Would it be a different period? So what period of history do you think deserves its own kind of movie?
I feel like Strong as Fire, Fierce as Flame does. I think there's so much action in this time period, and so much girl power. And I would love to see that on the screen.
I think it would be great too. Once you already started talking about she's dressing like a man, she's fighting this queen. It's like all of that, you can see it. I think the story does a great job of making that imagery very clear. And I think it would be a great movie. So any producers, executives,
Yeah.
call her. Um, so how did you kind of get into that alongside this story? And what about writing has always been in all kinds of forms been really powerful and empowering for you?
Yeah, I think, writing is so much about our stories and just feeling seen and feeling heard. And so when I wanted to be an author ever since third grade, when that same teacher who read us The Secret Garden had us write picture books, and he bound them as real hardcovers. And I thought it was so cool to see my name on the
Wow.
cover. Yeah, and I know that sounds like so silly, but I think it was so cool because I had never in my life seen an Indian name on the cover of a book in America ever. So I think that was like there was something there, I was probably too young to realize that. So I eventually in high school or middle school, I decided I wanted to be a Bollywood screenwriter because even though I never got to see myself in books or TV shows or movies in America, Bollywood was this one space where people who looked like me were heroes, and where my food and my cultures and my songs and dance were celebrated. So, Bollywood really took up that space in my life, where I had some representation. And of course, it wasn't my exact representation because I was born here and I grew up here. And so the stories weren't totally my story, but they were, I could feel seen. So in college, I studied screenwriting, and I started working for a Bollywood writer, director, producer after that. So I worked on the writing teams for several Hindi movies for 12 years or so before my first book was published. And I actually wrote Ahimsa in 2003, but it was published in 2017. So it took 14 years of revisions before that book finally won the New Visions Award and was published. So, and the great thing when I finally did get to write books was I was finally truly my story, because even in Bollywood, I was working on stories that were, more for adults and more dramatic than where my heart generally guides me for stories. So this was like, as an author, I was finally able to truly tell my story.
I think that's so cool. Like you don't even understand it. Deep down in my heart, I've always wanted to be a screenwriter. So I love to hear of actual people that get to pursue that. That's so awesome. But I also kind of wanted to talk about it just now as I'm thinking that's a long time. 14 years is a long time. And as a kid and as like a 16-year-old, a year is a long time for me. So how have you been able to instill the patience in your work to actually pursue this? Because my mom, she's a professor. She's gone to like 20 years of extra college after high school. And I can't even fathom the idea of waiting that long for something great that you've always looked forward to. So what patience has come to you as a writer, and how do you try to instill that and enforce that even through long projects and revisions and changing of creative vision?
Yeah, I have a lot of patience when it comes to that part of the business, sort of the revisions and will it sell or won't it sell. But I am really impatient before that. So it was really hard for me when my books weren't selling, and even as a screenwriter, none of the scripts I wrote here sold. So I tried for, sorry, my child just came in the room. I tried for a really long time to make it as a screenwriter and as an author, and I felt like quitting all the time. I was it's hard. It's hard writing something and getting rejection letters. And back then, letters came in snail mail. So I would submit queries for books, and then I would forget that I even sent them. And like 6 months later, you'd open the mailbox and you'd get these letters that were rejection letters. And it'd be like on a day that I'm feeling really good about myself. And so I'd start feeling bad all over again. So it was hard. I think I actually was ready to quit the week that I got the phone call that Ahimsa was going to be published. So I was pregnant with my third child, and she was born a week after that phone call. And I was like, well, this is it. It just didn't work out. And I tried for over a decade and it didn't work out. So I'm really glad that I was able to persist and that I had the privilege to keep persisting. Not everybody is able to. So I know that there was luck and privilege involved in that patience, I guess, over those years. As far as publishing goes, publishing is such a slow business that I think I was just forced to get that patience, and you know how it's like. So
Very slow. And
yeah,
especially for me as someone with a phone all the time, it
yes,
is immeasurably slow for all this stuff to happen.
absolutely. I'm like, well, why does it take 2 years for a book to get published? So I've just slowly gotten used to the patience side of the business part of this.
Well, I think it's very impressive. That's the biggest thing. Only thing I want to be as an adult is just I know I'll be more patient because I'll have a better understanding of time. Because for me, I'm about to be a senior in high school, feels like time is slipping underneath me. I can't deal with any of this stuff. And I can imagine that writing has that same amount of stress, even though time might feel like it's moving slow. The writing process is an important and a time that you need everything to be right. And I was watching some videos and I noticed that you have a dog named Limka. So how has your dog been a part of your writing process? And how have having 3 kids or 3+ kids been a part of that process?
Yeah. So yes, Limca is named after an Indian pop or a soda that is sort of like Sprite or 7 Up. So she has a very bubbly personality, I guess. She's actually in what I'm illustrating a book right now, and I put her in there. So she's a little bit of an inspiration, I guess. There. It's it's been tough this year. All three of my kids were virtually learning at home. So sometimes it's tough to write with all of them, but also I have 3 little beta readers right in my house. So anything I write, I have them read it and they give me their feedback, and I'm able to change things. Or if they look bored, I know that my pacing is incorrect here, and so I'm able to fix things, thanks to their feedback.
I think they're probably great editors. And I love that you have that community. I was watching a video where your dog was interviewing you, and I thought it was very cute. Uh, and I also thought it was interesting that you talk a lot about your growing up environment and how you saw the world as a kid. And you've even talked about it today and how your town really did not value diversity. And my town, I would say, doesn't or has tried to, because they see that I'm going to keep rocking the boat until they do. But have you noticed that same kind of issue within the publishing world, even in spaces like Bollywood or Hollywood? How have you seen that these kind of ideas that diversity is not as valuable have translated to all kinds of parts of the world?
Yeah. In Hollywood, especially, I would say when I stopped working there, diversity wasn't really a thing. These stories weren't being sought after. So I didn't really sell any of the screenplays I wrote about any Indian experience, because the feedback would always be that this isn't marketable because there are only a few. I don't know how many Indian Americans are in America, but they would think that's their only audience, and they didn't realize that diverse stories are all of our stories, and we can all appreciate diverse stories. In publishing, I think that latest study about children's books, which might be a year or two old now, it still found that there are more books about trucks and aliens and bears.
Yeah, animals and inanimate objects
Yeah,
over not white stories.
yes, over all BIPOC combined. And that's pretty devastating to hear.
Yes.
because I don't know any trucks and cars who are desperate to be seen in a book, but I sure know a lot of kids who would love to see themselves in stories. So, I think we all just have to keep writing and keep telling our stories, and hopefully we can get more and more stories out there, and we can change that mentality that diverse books are only for the people from that particular background. I think I am so grateful that my kids can read books about so many people from so many backgrounds, and have empathy and love for everyone because of that.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. I know that these stories, I hate that idea that only this particular group would be interested in those stories, because I find that I learn the most from people who are not like me, because in my everyday life I interact with so many people who are. And that kind of leads me down the train, I think, of authorship and coming up with ideas where oftentimes we see now that diversity is found through rebooting or recasting a character to be of a new ethnicity that's a BIPOC ethnicity, or a
Yeah.
not a more diverse experience. And I want to know kind of how you feel about that. How do you feel about? I personally prefer the creation of new stories. I'm always going to be for the creation of new stories. So how do you try to balance the idea that you're taking a completely new concept to the publishing world, which I love, versus trying to change it into some sort of fractured fairy tale or a second edition of an older story?
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way as you. I was just talking to someone about this, about why are the classics considered classics? Are they just the books that happen to survive from those eras? Because, there are so many other stories that we should be sharing with our kids and with each other right now. So, like you said, I'm not a fan of just I like new stories and I like
Yes,
authentic
exactly. Yeah.
stories. So I really love it when I'm able to totally be immersed in a totally new story, and from someone who doesn't look like me, and I'm able to see them and see their culture and really connect with them, and it's like I'm invited into their world. I think that's really important rather than just recasting an old story, because that's not often authentic. I mean, it depends on who's writing the story, of course, but
Yeah.
so I think that's probably how I feel about that.
Yeah, and I think it's really critical, especially for your kids are around my age, is to see, to see these new experiences, to see something that relates to them. And as they go to school and have been learning all these things, I'm sure you look at what books they're reading or what they're doing for homework, and what kind of issues do you try to correct? Because my mom is always trying to correct some sort of retelling of history that
Yeah.
I learn about in school. So how do you try to stay diligent about making sure that your kids care about school and do their homework, but also know that this isn't how it actually happened? This isn't how you should be thinking about these experiences. So, what's it been like? What has it been like as a mom to watch these things kind of transpire and try to do your best to teach them what you believe is the correct and more authentic way of telling stories?
Yeah, that's so funny that you asked this, because I think I have been the biggest pain for my district in the past year and a half, because I just couldn't stay silent. It's my kids, we live in the same town that I grew up in, and it's, I don't know, doubled or tripled in size, and it's a lot more diverse, and it still has a lot of racism and a lot of issues that need to be corrected, like any place in America. And so, it was really strange to me to see my oldest, who was in third grade, reading the same books that I read in third grade. And they were books that maybe they won the Newbery in the 60s or something, but they had really horrible racist portrayals of indigenous people, and it was written by a white lady, and there were several books like this, and every time I would bring it up and I would say that, my son's not reading that book. I actually owned that book because we had it from school, like it came home with us when I was in third grade, and I purged those books from our library because I think they're really harmful representations and they're not authentic. And so I would have, anytime that happened, I would give my kids books written by authors who were own voices. And so they were from the backgrounds of, they shared the backgrounds of their characters. So their stories were authentic. And we would read up on history, and we would look at stories like an Indigenous people's history of the United States for young adults. Or
I
we
have that book. I actually have. That's so hilarious. I do have that book. My mom just encouraged me to read it.
I'd get really mad and be like, all right, we're reading this book instead because this district is still reading these like 50-year-old books that are so wrong, you know? So I'm seeing some change. They're doing a library audit this summer, and they're getting rid of a lot of these books. It's not changing teachers' classroom libraries, unfortunately. So I've been trying, I got put on the district curriculum committee because
Oh, that's cool though.
so irritating, I
Congratulations.
think. So I don't know what'll happen from that, but I think all of us as students and as teachers and parents, we have to keep challenging these representations that are wrong. They're just plain wrong, and they shouldn't be taught to kids anymore. You know, it's 2021, and I don't see why we're reading these stories still. Um, I'm just over them. They need to go.
I really like that, and then I'm sure you and my mom will probably see these things very
Yes.
similarly. And I one of the things you mentioned that kind of sparked my interest is you talked about the authentic stories of the idea of own voices, where this is my family, this is my story. And one of the things that I also get questions from people who are not people of color is, how do I value, invest in, and support these stories and know where my place is to tell them? Because some of the most popular books in my school and in the middle grade world about enslavement are written by white authors. And it doesn't personally always trouble me, but I think there is a troubling idea to that. There is something that is slightly
Yeah.
concerning about the idea that the best-selling books about Black stories are not written by Black people. So how do you think that authors can navigate the idea of, this is not my experience, but I want to honor it, versus this is not my experience and it's not my story to tell?
Yeah. As far as not telling stories that aren't yours to tell, I think as authors, we just have to make sure that we are telling our authentic stories and stories from our backgrounds. I I just, I think, like you said, some of those stories might not be problematic, but I think why are we not uplifting the authentic voices instead? um, I think they deserve for their stories to be told because they are authentic, and they are, um, it's their story to tell, and so we should really support them. And it's hard, because that happens so often, that people who are not from the background of the characters write that story, and that story ends up being successful, and you may be authentically from that culture, and you've written a story and it doesn't sell the same. So I think it's our responsibility as consumers to make sure that we are uplifting voices that come from the same backgrounds as their characters.
Yeah, and we will continue to uplift your story because we love it so much. And I kind of wanted to ask you, just so people can, because we've talked so much about our beliefs and our own social perspectives on racism in the world, but we obviously need to talk more about this book. So as you were going through this process, what do your kids think of it? Do they think, oh, my mom's so cool, she's an author, she gets to write books about people like me? Or they're like, mom's been in her bedroom for 12 hours and I need her to come out to make me dinner? So how do they kind of see this process turn out? And how valuable do you think they don't get it yet? How valuable this might be? Or do you think that they've already started to understand why this matters?
Yeah, I think there's a part of it that where they don't get it because they're so surrounded by diverse books, because that's all I really bring into the house. And not my books, just, all the books
Yes,
that
yes,
we
yes.
read are diverse books. And so a part of me is like just thrilled that they don't know it any other way. They never had the experience I did, where I only read stories by white authors until maybe 11th grade. And so I I think it's pretty amazing that they don't have that same experience. At the same time, I think they do value these stories because I talk so much about how I grew up without that representation, and so many of us from different backgrounds grew up without any representation because diverse stories just didn't sell. And I know they were being written, they just were not being sold, and published. And so I think they really value the diversity. My son actually spoke up when his class had to read, I don't even remember the name, Sign of the Beaver, I think, which was one of those racist books. And he spoke up, he wrote his teacher and he wrote his principal, and he wrote them about how this is not, he talked about the racist incidents in the story, the languages that were being used that weren't correct. And the principal and his teacher both told him that they were really proud of him. So I like that they are sort of becoming mini activists, I would say. But
no, that's full fledged.
yeah.
I think we need to make that term more accessible. To me, activism is problem solving. Like if you're
Yeah.
problem solving, it's not as big of a job as everyone says, as we all do it.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
I think that's so awesome. And I've had many emails to send this year during virtual school where I think my teachers don't anticipate that I would want to speak up for myself, but I have. And it's so cool that they're rubbing off on that. They're learning that. And I think they'll be grateful. They'll be very grateful to be surrounded by that, I think, once they get to college and see
I hope so.
how much more there is left to learn.
Yes.
So as we kind of close this conversation, I still want to keep talking about Strong as Fire and what it means to you. So what do you really think is the thesis statement of writing historical fiction, and particularly this kind of story? What do you think that people like me who do not share this experience can really take away that is both personal and universal? Because there's clearly going to be universal themes, but what things can we learn more about Indian perspectives and historical perspectives on colonization that Strong as Fire can provide for us?
Yeah, so I think we can really see the truth behind colonization. And I know I talked a little bit about how we portray it as explorers and all this great stuff. But I hope this story makes readers really connect to the people who are affected by colonization. And I hope they can sort of apply it to our world and realize, when people in power call other countries derogatory names, which is something that happened earlier, that I hope they'll realize that those countries, a lot of them were looted of all their resources and riches and food and, stuff that the people created through colonization. And that, there's so much we can learn about that era. And there's so much we can apply to today's world. So I think that really makes it universal, this story. And I hope it empowers people. I hope they see that girls are worthy. And I also, one thing that happened when I was going on school visits with Ahimsa was that a lot of readers assumed that whatever happened in that story happened to every single Indian person. So I really tried to make it clear that things like sati were rare. They were awful, but they were rare. And I also wanted people to understand that child marriage is not specific to South Asia. It's in America. So I put in those stats at the end about the rates of child marriage. And at the time of the writing, I think several states didn't even have rules against child marriage in our country. So I hope that, readers can see that maybe there's an issue in this book that is happening in their own country that they can speak up for if it ends up moving them to do so.
I really love that. And I'm so excited to have this story become more accessible and celebrated by NEA for all kinds of kids. So I want to say thank you again so much. I've truly enjoyed this conversation. I think you and my mom would probably have a better one than you and I just had, but I really, really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here with you. My kids are so excited. You have no idea.
Oh, no way. Thank you.
Yes.